A very spirited and healthy conversation surrounding the Black experience in Long Beach, past, present, and future. The downtown discussion started about a year ago when an amount of information was being flooded based on the COVID pandemic, and we wanted to be able to kind of synthesize this information and get it out to members of our community. And we started the downtown discussion in hopes that disseminating this information would be an easy go-to resource for that information. That was whether it was coming from the federal government, the county, the state, or even the city. We wanted to get it out to as many people as possible. So we started with economic development at the city, the opportunity to present this information. This kind of evolved into more timely matters. In December, we hosted the downtown discussion to talk about placemaking and really what placemaking would look like post-pandemic and how the public realm would be treated with gatherings as well as small, mid, and large scale events whenever we were ready for that. And in January, we talked about the of designing this conversation and certainly promoting this conversation. Just some housekeeping matters. We have the Q&A on for everyone to submit their questions. Carl will moderate those questions. If you're on Facebook, you'll be able to submit those questions and it will be funneled to our moderator. The chat room is disabled for your convenience, so please don't try to engage in that. We want to be able to direct our attention and certainly our questions to the moderator. This conversation was really elevated by what I think we all experienced in May 31st, when we had some civil unrest in our downtown and throughout our city. What happened that night was very alarming and certainly disturbing. But what we saw the next day when we had our cleanup planned following the events of the previous night really provided some energy and really displayed what Long Beach was about. It wasn't what happened the night before. It was really what happened that day and following. Theresa will talk about really the framework of reconciliation that the city engaged in. We are, Downtown Long Beach Alliance is part of updating its strategic plan, and we are in the process now of including diversity, equality, inclusion, and access in our strategic plan. So we plan on having that as part of our culture. And I know that it's not something that will turn on a dime, but certainly making big inroads to having a more equitable community. And we want to be at the forefront of that as well. So I'm pleased to introduce Carl Kemp, who's been a longtime friend and community activist and community partner of mine, as well as our organization. He'll be moderating the conversation with a great and certainly respectable panelists that will be engaged in a very engaging and certainly spirited conversation. So Carl, if I may turn this over to you now and you can get the conversation started. Again, I want to thank all the participants for joining us this morning and look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Craig, and thank you and the Downtown Long Beach Association for really, I think, kind of in a revolutionary way, putting together this panel. In my time in Long Beach, I can't remember the DLBA doing a Black History Month panel. I may have missed it, but I don't recall it. And as you and I talked about, you know, certainly the DLBA is not a predominantly Black organization. In fact, it's woefully lacking in its Black membership. And I think that is why you are concentrating your efforts on it. I think that's laudable. But it's so important that if we're going to move ahead, as we discussed, as a nation, as a planet, that we take time to consider the other and invest real energy in whoever that other might be, to try to advance their cause, because in the end, we really are all one. I want to thank you for having me as the moderator. I want to thank all of our panelists. This is a powerhouse panel. If you know these individuals, you know that all by themselves, they can carry a program. My role here is not going to be to talk too much myself, but to try to facilitate a discussion. I have some preset questions, but as we go on, we'll have some free-flowing conversation as well. I want to start by introducing Ahmed Sapir. Ahmed Sapir is one of the very first people I met when I came to the city of Long Beach from South Central Los Angeles to go to Cal State Long Beach. I was taken by his, I think it was a tune-up shop on Willow by Errol Parker. And he thought it was important for me to meet Mr. Sapir, and he's been a mentor and a friend ever since. He is the owner and administrator of the Orange County Community Care Long Beach-based mental health residential facility for adults that he founded in 1985. He has a lot of businesses. He's a consummate businessman. He has big business, small business, all the way to the Energy Smoothie Bar, which is a traveling business that promotes delicious drinks. He has an extensive background of involvement in the Long Beach community and currently serves as the chair of the Long Beach Community Improvement League. And he's the current chair of the Masjid Al Sharif of Long Beach, which is one of the preeminent mosques here in Long Beach, and is the vice president and former president of the 100 Black Men. He served as the president of the NAACP. It's a long list. He's an extensive community worker and has earned certificates of recognition from Congressmember Alan Lowenthal, Vice Mayor Rex Richardson, former Mayor Beverly O'Neill, and a long list. He was active at Cal State Long Beach and Long Beach City College, where he, after serving a stint in the Navy, came and brought his leadership to various campus organizations. So it's a real pleasure and honor to have you on the panel as our elder and as my mentor. Next, I want to introduce Melissa Morgan. Melissa Morgan is a friend, first and foremost, and a friend of many in the community. I first met her while working with the city of Long Beach, and it was just palpable, the difference that she brought into even that internal community. When you work for the city, you're working on a team, but she brought a different energy, a better energy, a Blacker energy that the city needed. And it was really always a pleasure hanging out with her in the council chambers during the city council meetings. Melissa is a director of communications for Long Beach Forward and a co-founder of the Black Wellness Collaborative, also known as Be Well, and the founder of VerbWorks and All Things Black. Since moving to Long Beach in 2001, Melissa has focused her professional and personal work in areas related to diversity and inclusion, civil rights, racial justice, economic equity, education, and youth serving initiatives, primarily in the communities across Southern California. I love this part right here. Morgan is unapologetically Black and believes that race and income should not determine one's future in Long Beach. Her passion for social justice and equity come from her roots as a biracial person growing up in the South, where she engaged people in community service and leadership development to build relationships and empathy for others' experiences. She graduated from the University of North Florida with a bachelor's degree. Upon graduation, she served as a Rotary Cultural Ambassador Scholar of Goodwill in Merida, Venezuela, before making California her home. Let's see here. She has worked for the Anti-Defamation League, Orange County Human Relations Council, the Heart of America Foundation, the City of Long Beach Human Dignity Program in the City Manager's Office, and the Long Beach Center for Economic Inclusion. And she's a founding member of the Alpert Jewish Community Center's JCC Cares volunteer organization. just a impressive resume that I didn't know before even doing this panel. I just know her as a friend. Thank you for being on the panel with us today, Melissa. Next, I want to introduce a new friend who is just, we had a pre-conversation before this panel, and she left such an impression on me that I am excited about the future of not just downtown Long Beach and not just Long Beach, but I'm excited about the future of our friendship. Because anytime you can add to your network somebody who brings capacity and caring that aligns with yours, for me, that's always a special moment. So I'm excited to have her as a new friend through working on this panel. Keena Fuller has a passion for business development and set out to build a consulting firm for its hands-on expertise, executive coaching, expansive knowledge, and award-winning services. Aligned with her education in behavioral economics, global business management, marketing, and small business enterprise, it is her 20 plus years of experience in business management, development, sales, marketing, and higher education management that provides each client and organization with a level of professional prowess that is unsurpassed. As executive director of Fuller Management, she is adamant about client engagement and overall customer satisfaction, personally managing every client account. It is her careful attention to detail and integrated strategy that has helped consistently support and grow each client's revenue year over year. I know this is the abbreviated version, but it really is great to meet you and to have you on the panel with old friends that I think will be your new friends as well. I think this might be my 37th panel with Theresa Chandler, but it is always a pleasure and a joy. As someone who worked in the city manager's office, to have a person with her ethos, her integrity, and her background in equity in a high leadership position and engaged day in and day out during a pandemic. If you don't work for the government and don't understand the amount of time that COVID takes up in your life, you cannot appreciate the weight that Theresa Chandler is carrying, because she not only is carrying the weight of a pandemic, but when George Floyd was murdered by the police in Minneapolis, she was a point person here in the city at engaging folks in the community externally and keeping the folks inside City Hall on track internally so that they stay true or as true as possible to the mission of making things better. As deputy city manager for the city of Long Beach, with the responsibility of elevating the city's coordinated efforts related to homelessness, violence prevention, and youth development, Theresa Chandler is just one of the keys inside that triumvirate in the city manager's office. She also provides oversight and leadership to the city's Office of Civic Innovations and the Office of Equity. She most recently supported the team through a racial equity and reconciliation planning process to develop a citywide plan to eliminate systematic racism by advancing racial equity in Long Beach. Chandler began her career with the City of Long Beach Department of Health and Human Services in 2015 as the city's homelessness services officer, and soon after moved into the Human Services Bureau manager position. She has a bachelor's degree in psychology and a master's in public health from San Francisco State University, and more than 20 years of management experience in both public and nonprofit organization settings. She's a mom of two beautiful children and a wife to a Long Beach State grad. So glad to have you on our panel again, Theresa. I know you're going to really bring details that will make this conversation more rich. Last but certainly not least is one of my best friends, someone who really does walk the walk. I could tell so many stories about Pastor Wayne Cheney, but on a personal level, he really does represent all of the things that a friend should and could be: a pastor, a shepherd, an innovator, a thinker, And most people, when they think about him, think of him in a church context. What I've come to know about Wayne is that he is a business mastermind. He has a brilliant business mind, and much of what folks may see him in or on him, as he said during one sermon, you didn't pay for this, boo-boo. This is not, his success has not come on the backs of his parishioners. In fact, Antioch is giving away almost $500,000 worth of stuff every month. So it's more giving than getting. But he got where he is based on a brilliant business mind. He's a Morehouse graduate. He has a very long resume. I could go down it. He is affectionately known as Pastor Wayne. I'm going to read some of it. I don't want to shortchange you on your intro, and then we'll get into it. He's a prototypical contemporary spiritual leader. His relevant teaching style and ability to cultivate spirited worship environments aids in unifying people from diverse cultural, ethnic, and generational backgrounds. Born into a 3-generation-long spiritual lineage, he continues the legacy left by his grandfather, Joe Cheney Jr., through his work as senior pastor of Antioch Church of Long Beach. However, Pastor Wayne's ministry extends beyond the congregation he provides leadership to. His determination to influence culture with the culture of Christ's kingdom is evident in his work, both inside and outside of his local church context. Pastor Cheney is the visionary behind the creation of the Long Beach Gospel Fest. Looking forward to having that back one day. The city's premier gospel experience. This event brought 20,000 people of diverse backgrounds together to worship, pray, and be inspired. He serves on the executive board of Global Tribe International, whose mission is to rescue those in physical and spiritual poverty, reach communities with the gospel, and recruit and empower young leaders. Pastor Cheney has been the recipient of various awards and commendations. He's received congressional, senatorial, and presidential recognitions, and is noted in various publications. Pastor Wayne was featured on the cover of Church Executive Magazine for 2 consecutive years, hosted a radio show on KJLH, helped swear in and inaugurate Governor Newsom, has been invited to the White House by several presidents. He's internationally known. I've experienced this firsthand when I went to South Africa with him. Folks all over the world know and love him, and we're lucky to have him on this panel and lucky to have him in this community. So with that extensive list of introductions, thank you for being here. I want to start our conversation off, and I want to start with you, Mr. Sapir, as we talk about this discussion, past, present, and future. What were some of the key factors of the past? We're talking about business. We're talking about Black business. We're talking about business in Long Beach. What were some of the key factors of the past that impaired the economic prosperity of Black residents and businesses in Long Beach? You're on mute, Mr. Sapir. You're on mute. We can't hear you. There you are.
This is above my pay grade. I was born when we used dial telephones. One of the initial historical facts are that Long Beach really began the gentrification of communities prior to 1985. One aspect that affected the African-American community was when it was downsized and rezoned to only be 2 units. As prior to that, you could build 4 units in the zoning of the central area. When they did that, that affected the generational wealth that could have been developed. I may say I built the last 4 units, and I mean the last 4 units that could be built in the central area. In fact, the staffer at the conditional use hearing said that I got approved the day before the zoning came in, which I was aware of. And I knew I had to have my first inspection prior. But this affected families that had real property in the central area. The other item is the low quality of the school district. I used to fight with the schools on the Board of Education on allowing our children not to be put in what I call Mickey Mouse classes and elevate them to classes that gave them the quality education they needed to go further in life. One aspect is the Martin Luther King, when that initiative started, the name California Avenue, Martin Luther King, it stopped at 7th Street and stopped at Signal Hill. And this was an overt effort of the, let's say, outer community from Recreation Park, showing how unimportant it was for the city of Long Beach. And we fought it. We said it should go all the way through, and we heard excuses like, well, everybody have to change their business card, they'd have to change their addresses, all this frivolous. The other item is Councilman Sullivan, Emmett Sullivan, who was the last Caucasian councilman of the 6th district, ran the 6th district like a plantation, in that if your water got turned off, mothers with children, they had to contact 1 or 2 people to be able to get it turned back on. And there's some ugly parts of that story that I won't cover. And in the past, you know, Long Beach has spent as much as $240,000 to have an ad in magazines to advertise the city on airplanes. I'll stop there. Carl?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's an interesting place to stop. I might dig just a little bit deeper, because I think I think you shed some light on, it's important for us to look in the mirror and be honest about ourselves. And as much as we like to talk about the beauty of the international city and having the largest Cambodian population outside of Cambodia and all of the things that we do celebrate and rightfully celebrate, and I'm one of them who celebrates this city. I love this city. It's also important that as we love this city, we are honest about some of the places we've come from, some of the places we're at, so we can improve the places that we're going together. So I don't want you to alligator arm, some of these stories, because frankly, these stories better than anybody on this panel. I didn't even know the name Sullivan until just now, I'm ashamed to say, because I've always known that seat to be a Black seat in the 6th district before the historic victory of Suli Saro. So, don't feel like you have to short arm your answers about what has happened. I want to ask more specifically, as a Black businessman in Long Beach, knowing that, Long Beach was once segregated. What, if you could talk about some of the past relative to how the city has, welcomed or not Black business development and growth?
Well, basically, the majority of our businesses were on Anaheim between Atlantic and Alamitos. That was the thoroughfare that most of the African-American businesses were. But as the community changed, by there being a lack of education or generational wealth, the children didn't take over the businesses. And this is a problem not only in Long Beach, but all over the country. They see parents work so hard to run the businesses, get them through school, send them to college. Lack of appreciation doesn't roll over to some of our young. That was our main corridor. And now Martin Luther King Avenue was a continuation. I think when you, as a community, began to change, the economics began to change. And as it changed, it moved to more sports than business. And it takes a certain mind to go into a business as opposed to getting a job. Like it was said in the South that a lot of African Americans had businesses, and they said, well, let's give them a job in government and they'll stop being enterprising. So that kind of existed here in Long Beach at that time. I know for a fact, my dear friends, some are still living and some passed away, and I've confronted them all. The front line of civil rights in Long Beach, they took those people and gave them a job with the city. And at that time, they didn't even think they could vote because they were now waiting on the city. I'm just giving you a preview of the mindset that existed.
Yeah, I appreciate that perspective. Let me pass it for a discussion about the past next. Sort of same question. Pastor Cheney, your family has been here for a long time. Antioch, I believe, has been in the community for over 50, 60 years. What stories or experiences have you heard or lived where you've seen how the economic prosperity of Black residents and businesses was affected by the city, hampered by the city, if I'm being really clear, and certainly not just from a church perspective, but you have within your congregation many successful business people as well, who I'm sure have confided in you. Talk if you could about some of this that's happened in Long Beach in the past.
Yeah, I'm grateful to be a part of this esteemed panel, and my dear friend Carl Kemp. Craig, you couldn't have had anyone better to facilitate this, and thank you for your visionary leadership. And I had no idea about the origins of these discussions, but I do think it's important to talk about, again, not just what happened the day of or after the night of rioting downtown, but I think it's important to talk about the day before the night, which in many respects was, and again, I know most of us here on the panel and listening know this, but I had friends that lived down the street and around the corner who were watching the news. And again, the wonderful things that took place that day, the statement that was made in that city, our city, the peaceful protest, we haven't seen anything quite like it, at least in my lifetime, in the city of Long Beach. And I want to thank you. In fact, we just happened to link up. You were marching in the same spot I was as we made those rounds early in that day. So I think it's significant to note both of those things. And thank you again for this panel. It's much needed and revolutionary for that matter. For me, Carl, I think that while there's stories I could retell, things I've heard, I can recount. As you know, I wasn't there for a lot of it early on, as I'm still 41, but am acquainted with it. While Long Beach has its unique issues, I really do think that many of the challenges we've faced nationally were evident here. While there is a unique bent to Long Beach, I think it's important for us to understand that those issues of discrimination, racism, inequality, inequity, were taking place here as well. And it was difficult is at times we have a tendency to mystify things, and that is to look back and talk about, the good old days, or to gloss over some of those things that have taken place historically because we love our city. Well, listen, we can love our city, but talk about the history of our city. If we don't understand the history of our city, we don't understand that the same things that were happening nationally were taking place here, we're not going to do any better going forward. So, what did it look like in Long Beach? It looked like what it looked like in many other parts of the world. Now, obviously, there are different dynamics and more pronounced conflicts when you have the Black and white polarization without much diversity. I heard a quote, and I'm probably butchering this, in a cultural competencies class at Claremont I was in, and they said if you put two faiths or two people groups in a city, they will annihilate each other. But if you put three, there will be perfect harmony. And so I do think there is something unique as it relates to Long Beach's cultural diversity. It may not have been as polarized as parts of the South and the Jim Crow South, but again, some of the things that the rest of the nation faced, we faced universal issues of discrimination, injustice, inequity. Another thing that I think hindered economic, impeded economic progress is, like everywhere else, our need to address the immediate. When you have to address the immediate, whether it's a broken family structure and system, and we could talk about the origins of that on another panel, or whether it's just parents trying to make ends meet to change their station in life, you don't have room for imaginative wealth building. There's not as much bandwidth to think about how you're going to get to the next place economically, like Maslow's, right? Hierarchical pyramid. When you're taking care of your basic needs, you can't get to dreaming as readily as some of our counterparts about how to build wealth. And so some of those things were an issue. Another issue that I think is a byproduct of discrimination is the idea of, wealth is built while concepts are great. Relational equity with those that have access or information about better opportunities is really important. While there are inroads now, historically, that has not always been the case. While there, and I appreciate your introduction as it relates to some of the things I do outside of church or ministry. But while there's been great ingenuity on my part in some of those areas, most money I've made has been through, at times, access to a stock tip because of the station of a friend of mine. At the end of the day, we don't talk enough about relational equity and how that allows us to become forwardly mobile economically, as it relates to wealth building. So again, those are some of the things that have been challenges. And quite honestly, while, again, we celebrate the progress we've made, the reality is, even in our beautiful city, these things are still issues. You talk about the congregants. Shoot, we don't have to go to the congregants. I can tell you about some of my experiences. While there's so many that have advocated for us, if there wasn't a 60-year legacy in the city, if there wasn't relational equity, that is, in many respects, generational relational equity, I couldn't imagine accomplishing some of the things that we've been able to accomplish in Long Beach. Quite honestly, with all those things coming to bear, at times it was a fight to offer to the city what brought money to the city, what brought PR to the city that was broader than our own local context. When we talked about the Gospel Fest, we thank God for Craig and others who knew us, and Steve Goodling and others who promoted goodwill going in. But we had to convince people, when we're bringing thousands of people to the downtown area, that it's worthwhile for them to sign to let us close the street against even economic expansion for that day. I mean, shoot, I think most of those restaurants and businesses made more in that day than they did the next 3 weeks. But it took convincing, and sometimes that convincing, as much relational equity as I have, and is as much diversity in my personal life, ethnic diversity as I have, I realize some of the hesitancy is because while we want business, I don't know that we want that kind of business. This is the reality. This is not historical. This is lived in my lifetime under my leadership. And often, again, there are hurdles we have to overcome just to, in many respects, convince people that our dollars are just as green. And I think it's important, going forward, as we've again made inroads, it's important to understand that there is a psychology that affects our economic expansion and our economic growth. Now, after, again, a couple of successful events, and they found that, a predominantly Black group could come to downtown or beyond. And not only is it peaceful, it's one of the best events, as quoted in the LA Times from several political officials, that we've had. One of the safest events. Our street team that had to normally come after all the events we have and clean up, they didn't have to come and clean up because the people that came down and gave us a great free show also cleaned up. And so it took a while for that again, us to overcome some of those things. It's psychological. When we talk to other promoters in the downtown area, we had to move it from downtown to the Marina Green. There are hurdles that have to be overcome. And it's not because we don't understand magnitude in the city of Long Beach. We have the Grand Prix, we have New Year's, we have a successful Pride Parade. But again, while there are logistical challenges and issues that have to be navigated, when we talk about Black promoters with predominantly Black events, again, there seems to be at times, not from everyone, we have great advocates, but a common thread of suspicion.
Can I interject?
And concern. And last piece, and I'm grateful for all of our friends, some of our friends in the downtown area that knew us historically when we purchased the building on 4th and Pine, which is another conversation. Maybe that's not past. We'll get to that maybe when we talk about president.
We'll get to that.
Yeah. You see some of those things. Now, my point is, as we talk about economic inclusion and growth in our city and getting quality Black businesses, not only in the downtown, but citywide, we've got to wrestle with that elephant in the room. Because if someone with our history, been here 60 years, people say, well, welcome, you can come. So listen, you got here 5 years ago. I know I can, thank you. And forgive me, it's not the pastoral side, but here's my point. When you talk about this sort of relational equity and goodwill in a city for 60 years, generationally, if we are up against these psychological and racial constructs, if we're pushing against that, and it requires often a great deal of pushing, what would it be like for someone who's outside of the city without history, who brings a quality business along Beach, who's African American? What is that struggle like? What's the struggle for the promoter who wants to come into the city with a concert that will draw a predominantly Black crowd? What is their journey like if this has been my experience? Yeah,
and I appreciate the fact that you're 41. I thank you for throwing that in my 48-year-old face. I want to speak a little more directly before I pass it to Melissa for a discussion about the past. Certainly, she's got some inside information about City Hall and has been around. You asked what it's like. One of the things that when I was with the city, and I'm sure is probably still talked about, if not, at least in the back of the mind, if not talked about, is in 1985, Run DMC did a concert in the city of Long Beach. And, as things sometimes do, I think it went down a little bit. I think there might have been a fight and maybe a little bit more that broke out with some of our gang affiliated brothers. And that is still a foundational thought in the minds of folks who are in charge of approving special events or affiliated with those approvals. So is that fair? Of course it's not fair. I think one of the things we've also seen in this day and age is that there is a deep and irrational commitment to white supremacy in this country. And Long Beach is not immune. And that's not, theoretical. We can see the numbers. 70 million plus people voted in a white supremacist direction that, was more megaphone than dog whistle in the end. So that still impacts how things are approved and move forward and supported, not just in America, but also in Long Beach. There's conversation about wanting to see Black business succeed, but we don't have to go that far back in our history to see what happened to Black Wall Street in Tulsa and Oklahoma when Black businesses were thriving. Jealousy set into the hearts of those folks who could not thrive and achieve like those Black business people, and they bombed that thriving business community into oblivion. And there's a double standard. There's a double standard in the application of the rules and the laws, and we can see, the differences as plain as day just in 2020. George Floyd versus, the insurrection at the Capitol. So, these double standards are historic, but they're current as well. I want to go to Melissa and really hear your thoughts, though, Melissa.
Cool, thank you. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Great. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome, community. I see some folks on Facebook Live. Thank you for Long Beach Post for putting this message out as well. So I've got 5 Ds for you, 5 Ds to help us reflect on the past. I think that if we want to live in a city that not only tolerates, there's that word tolerate, right? But doesn't only just tolerate Black folks, but also embraces us and celebrates us, then we have to really lean in. There's that phrase, lean into the discomfort of the past. This is, I think, what we've been looking for in the racial reconciliation process that Theresa can talk about. We're really looking for our community to lean into the discomfort and own what's happened. So I've got 5 Ds for you. The first is disconnected developers. The second is displacement. The third is decimation and destruction of communities. The fourth is disappearance of Black folks. And lastly is discrimination. So around disconnected developers and development, if there were any ways that the DLBA, for example, advocated for gentrification in the past, as they have, if they have not included cross-class engagement and included the insight and perspectives of real people who live in the neighborhoods of downtown, then that's incredibly problematic. That is disconnected development. When we look at gentrification, this is happening across the country. And what I love about Long Beach and why I continue to move back here, I've been here most of the last 20 years, is I love our diversity. I love the people, of what the people has to offer, right? I read through the city's downtown Long Beach plan, which is on the DLB website, and I can post the link here. And nowhere in the values does it talk about its people. Talks about buildings, it talks about the architecture, it talks about being a destination place. When I used to work for the city, Bob Foster said the city was about trade, tourism, and technology. So a lot of that was about other people, but not our people. When you look at gentrification, you have to think about, who does gentrification benefit? Yeah, it's beautiful driving downtown. I've lived there 3 times on Ocean Boulevard, as I shared with Carl. I can't afford it anymore. In Long Beach, we are a renter community. As Black folks, we are a highly renter community as well. I think about 80% of us rent, and most of us are rent burdened, meaning that we pay more than 30% of our income on rent. So for our development to be more engaged, you have to include community voice. The second D, displacement. So upgrades, improvements, having luxury high rises has displaced and forced migration of people out of downtown Long Beach. It's changed. We've changed the face of it. Walmart came in, changed the face of it. High rises built, changed the face of it. When I moved here, my first apartment was on Ocean. I could step outside. It was an old, beautiful building. I could turn and I could see the ocean. So I could sit there and enjoy it. Now it's incredibly blocked by these high rises that have been built because of our gentrification. So, you know, who shapes these decisions? Who benefits from this upgraded standard of living? It's definitely not Black people or people of color. And there's a cost to longtime residents. There are people who live in apartment complexes, multi-generational families who've grown up here. This is their story and they have been pushed out. Third, decimation and destruction of communities. So this is really related to issues of class and classism. Classism, racism, these are systems of advantage based on class or race, where a group of people, they get power. They get privilege, they get access. So when we're looking at these issues, we're looking at folks who are wealthier, we're looking at folks who are whiter, who have the power and privilege and access, and their voice is getting heard. Decimation and destruction. So folks are losing neighborhoods, they are losing their social network, they're losing their homes, they're losing their history. Number 4, disappearance of Black folks. Our population, it rose a bit and then it started to fall over the last couple of years. You know, I'm often learning about families and friends they're getting pushed out to the Inland Empire. I've been pushed out to North Long Beach. Love North Long Beach, but I tell you what, when my kids go to college, I'm moving back to downtown if I can afford it, right? So we're seeing our community look different and we're not seeing as many Black folks in our community anymore. And then lastly, discrimination. Ahmed talked about this a little bit earlier. We're looking at, we have a long, flawed history that persists today. Discrimination in our school system. That's a whole other soap opera, right? Discrimination in housing, discrimination in health, and discrimination in the workforce. So when I look at other people like me, I'm a Black woman, I am rent burdened. I make $65,000 a year. And I saw in the chat some conversation about, well, what about other Black business owners? Most of us are sole proprietors. So I've always had a side hustle just to be able to make it here, because I want to know, where do I fit in? I want to stick around in this community. I want my kids to grow up here. So $65,000 a year, you divide it by 30%. 30% of my income should go to rent. Where can I find a place to live that's less than $1,600 in a place that's safe for my children? 2 little girls, 2 little Black girls. So this is very personal, and it's also very much about our community, because I'm a statistic. I'm just one of the many of those Black folks of us who are still around here. 61% of households in Long Beach are renters. Our renters are mostly Black, Indigenous, people of color here. And Black women, the statistics show we are the most rent burdened when you look at every single category of people who live here in Long Beach. So I would love to ask, who are we changing the quality of life for? And how are we going to engage voices of people who live here, whose roots are here, not just the ones who are multi-generational Long Beach from when it was Iowa by the sea, but the other folks who are part of this picture that make Long Beach so wonderful.
Fantastic. That is good stuff, Melissa. Iowa by the Sea, for those folks who didn't catch that reference, is what they used to call Long Beach. It was an enclave designed and destined for transplants from Iowa. Not a lot of Black folks in Iowa now, even less then. So that is really sort of the history of the city. I want to pass it, speaking of the city, to Theresa to offer some thoughts on the past.
Thank you.
Madam Manager.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here this morning. It's great to be here with all of the panelists, and hard acts to follow for sure. I just have a few things that I want to include from my public health lens and coming from the city. As my fellow panelists have been speaking to this morning, the historic pathway for Black people and people of color has been burdened with obstacles and challenges for decades in Long Beach. So this is in all aspects of life, looking at our health, our housing, education, employment, entrepreneurship, in policing, and within the criminal justice system. So the list is expansive. This institutional and structural racism that we've been speaking to have created significant barriers for Black entrepreneurs and businesses just the same. Some examples include redlining, as we've been speaking to within our housing discrimination, the school to prison pipeline, and the war on drugs. So when we take a deep dive into the data, focusing on the quality of life for Black folks in Long Beach, it reveals a persistent racial and economic inequities that cut across multiple systems, both in the past and unfortunately still today that we see. So in public health, we utilize data to understand the root causes of the issues that we're seeking to work out, right? So data are used to identify differences in outcomes across the city, to understand the why, and to design appropriate interventions to reduce the disparities. We also use data to evaluate program impact, to monitor progress, to determine barriers to care, and to influence public policy. So data really drives our decision-making and helps us really see the truth, and so that we can move forward, but we get to the root causes of the issues. So in Long Beach, similar to other cities across the country, as we've been speaking to, the data shows that more often than not, Black people have the poorest health and social outcomes because of systemic racism. So a few data points that I always bring into my presentations, and some of you have probably heard them, but they're really important to make, is that Black residents are hospitalized for asthma 9.4 times more often than our white residents. 25% of very low birth weight babies are born to Black mothers, although we only account for 13% of the population. White families are 2 times more likely to own their homes compared to Black families. And these factors and many others, such as trauma and poverty and air quality, affect how long we live. If you drive from the east side of Long Beach to the west side of Long Beach, a baby born on the east side is expected to live 17 years longer than a baby born on the west side. And that data is very much real still today. And we have to get to the discrepancies in those numbers. So a key factor to consider when thinking about impairment to economic prosperity is the connection, as we've been speaking to, between home ownership and the racial wealth gap. Black residents in Long Beach historically experienced huge barriers to homeownership due to government policies that we call redlining. So when we have been able to purchase homes, our investments have been compromised by public and private disinvestment that caused the value of our homes to artificially be suppressed. So further racial discrimination in financial services made borrowing to make home repairs difficult. The result is that homeownership, which serves as the primary vehicle for building wealth over generations, especially for low and moderate income families, has not worked for us. And effective measures that can immediately improve the circumstances are long overdue. And so, not to be a dark cloud, but we've been speaking to the data and what's real and how we have to address these things in order to get people to an even playing field. The same policies that have impacted a Black family's ability to own and maintain a home have impacted our Black entrepreneurs' ability to own and maintain a business. And so Black businesses are not getting approved for financing at the same rates as other groups, despite having similar credit and financial assets. And there are past and recent studies that have proven that just simply because of implicit bias, this is true. And so we can share some of that information as well, where that comes from. But the inability to create wealth at the same rates as other groups impacts the ability for all of us to sustain business and to buy homes and to move forward. So I just want to bring in the data piece, because it's important that we lead these conversations with the numbers that are telling us the truth about what's happening across the city. So I will pass it on. Thank you.
No, listen, I'm so glad that you brought that to the conversation. The data is important. And, as we talked about in the pre-panel discussion, as you and I talked about, Craig, this is Black History Month, and we could dedicate the whole segment to talking about the past. I want to stop and just say that it's important that we acknowledge the past. But I think we are beyond the time. 2020, I think, was an accelerator year, and we're beyond the time where acknowledgement is sufficient, to say, yes, enslavement of African people happened and it was really bad. Didn't happen when I was in school sufficiently, but we're a little bit further down the road. But what are we going to do about the crater that's been left? So the acknowledgement piece is cool, but I think we have to talk more about how we restore. So again, I want to thank Craig for giving us this platform to do that. Before we go into, I want to go into the next phase about talking about the president. I'm going to lead with Kina on that. I want to pause and acknowledge that, one of the things that DLBA has done is begun to map out where Black businesses are in downtown Long Beach. And I'm not sure if it's live yet. I think it is. But if you go to their website, you'll be able to see where the Black-owned businesses are in the downtown. And one of the things I love about what DLBA is doing, and what frankly Craig's leadership and commitment looks like, is it's not just limited to the downtown. He's, I think, included in this website a link to Black-owned Long Beach, which gives a perspective of all of the Black-owned businesses in the city. And so it's that kind of partnership and vision, both locally in the downtown and citywide, that we need to move out of the past and into a stronger present. I want to now go to Kina to talk about the present. She's a current downtown Long Beach businesswoman. That's where she does her business. And I'll lead with this question with you, Kina. How would you describe the current challenges and opportunities Black residents and businesses face in Long Beach in general, but downtown specifically?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. Thank you, Carl. And good morning to everyone. Thank you so very much for this opportunity. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you to DLBA for hosting this very important discussion. It is an honor to be a part of this panel. With reference to your question, so many things come to mind. I think of myself personally in two ways: as being a Black woman and being a woman in business. And I believe part of the reason why I have that perspective is because of the various ways that individuals outside of my immediate relationships or my professional relationships look at me as a person. I had a very recent conversation with a very good friend of mine, and we were talking about everything that happened last summer with the murder of George Floyd and the civil unrest here in Long Beach. And one of the things that I've always professed is I would love to be viewed as just a person, a business person, an individual who operates in this space, who is qualified, educated, and capable to do what it is that I do, which she does. And what he said to me was very simple and also very profound. He said, being that I am a mixed race person myself and identify as a Black woman, he said, it's okay for you to think of yourself that way, but it's important to remember that though you are biracial, you are just not white. And it really stood out to me because as confident and as self-assured as I am as an individual, a wife, a mother, a business owner, a person, it really put things into perspective for me. I had a really significant aha moment realizing that, okay, wow, that's very interesting, because I sort of crossed the barrier, but I'm just not white. So with that in mind, what I've seen professionally for a lot of people, including myself, is you talk about some of the existing challenges, and there's some past, there's some present, there's some future in that question. So it's a little bit loaded, if you will. But if I were to speak to the present, I can say that some of my individual recent experiences as being a Black business owner, funding, limitations to funding. If you are going to start a business, it's going to be one of the most difficult pursuits that you have, one of the most difficult things that you'll experience. It doesn't make sense. Entrepreneurship doesn't make sense. And to have the opportunity or the potential to be successful as a business owner, more often than not, you're going to need some capital, especially because of the type of business or industry that you're looking at pursuing. So what a lot of people think to do is make sure your credit's right, make sure you have some assets in the bank, and then you go to the bank and you suited and booted, with your business plan and ready to prepare and present what it is that you have to offer to your community, only to realize that when you actually go through the application process, they're going to ask you to check that box. They're going to ask for that ethnicity, recognition to be a part of your application process. In fact, when I started my business 11 years ago and I went to a traditional banking institution, and I sat down with a person that was completing the application, I was apprehensive. And my mother can speak to this. And I usually don't check that box. And the reason I don't check the Black box or even multiple boxes is because once you check Black, you're viewed in a very different way. And so when I went through that application process and I had the credit and I had some assets and I wasn't asking for a terrible amount of funding in the onset, I was denied. But as an alternative to receiving funding that would have been better fared in terms of the interest rate or the way that the funding is accumulated over time, or the value of the dollar amount that I was asking for, the referral was to a credit card. You can have a credit card. You can have a compounding interest debt at ridiculous interest rates with a very low credit amount. It was less than $5,000. And if you can do well with this, then you can start that business. But the funding that you would truly need to be successful in this industry or the area that you're looking at entering in, we can't offer that to you. So that to me was very eye-opening personally. And I've heard this similar type of story for a lot of people, a lot of women, a lot of Black women. My company works with predominantly women. That's a primary demographic that we serve. I work with everyone from single person operations on up to public universities and everything in between. And the conversations that I have are very interesting because there is an obvious disparity between the successes of individuals based on the proximity, or Pastor Cheney talks about relational equity, the direct proximity that they have to someone who can be helpful, supportive, or potentially influential. And more often than not, what I've found is that person is me. Going back to that financial scenario, when I attempted to achieve the option or opportunity for more standardized funding and was denied, I decided to take my very last check from my corporate environment and put every penny into starting my business, and had to do that for 22 months until I was able to yield a single dollar's profit. It's hard. It's very hard. And sometimes it can feel as though the system that is in place is not provided or created for the benefit of all people collectively. There is definitely an apparent divide. And because of that, a lot of people can very easily be discouraged. Again, Pastor Cheney talks about the psychological implications of our personal and professional experiences. If you hear no for years and years, or you're told you can't so many times, or you feel as though you're Black first, then a person next, and everything else and every other quality or attribute you have to offer to your community or industry, it weighs on you. It becomes daunting, and it continues to discourage people so much to the point when they suppress themselves, which I believe is partly the intent. So going back to current challenges as it relates to the Black community, yes, access to funding is absolutely a barrier to entry. The other thing that I would consider is the way that Black business owners are viewed in society. We talked about this when we had our pre-panel discussion, talking a little bit about being a Black business owner and owning a Black business. So I'm here in downtown, and it's somewhat costly. If you are housing your business in a business improvement district, there are assessment fees, and different assessment fees are applied to different parts of the city of the 9 districts that we have, but it's considerably higher in the downtown footprint, which is in some ways to be expected because of the overall demographic and infrastructure, the logistics, the access to different attributes and assets that we have here in the downtown footprint. So you pay a premium. But a lot of individuals who I've had the chance to communicate with, who are either prospective business owners or existing business owners considering housing their businesses here in downtown, sometimes that funding or the costs associated with even obtaining a business license can feel as though it is a barrier, it is a limitation. And so, like what Theresa was saying previously, there's an element of redlining associated with that. It's, yeah, you can come down here, anybody can come down here, but can you afford it? And a lot of people can't. And again, being a Black woman in business, coupling with some of the statistics that Melissa was sharing, it's, if you have to decide between, feeding those within your household, or staying put, or potentially having interest in expanding your business from being a home-based operation to being what would be considerably viewed as more of a legitimate business by having a brick and mortar, or a beautiful executive office, or a staple location that people can actually go to and enter. But you're having to decide between the well-being of those within your household as well as yourself. You will always choose what is good and necessary under your roof as opposed to what's needed for a business, because a business is just a thing. It's an entity. It's not a person. It doesn't live and breathe or have feelings. So in a lot of ways, for both myself as well as those that I communicate with on a consistent basis, that keeps them from moving their business forward. And because of that, a lot of times what children see in their households is the hustle, which is very common, a very common term in the Black community. I mean, people of all ethnicities utilize it, but when I hear hustle, when I hear grind, that means hard work. And if you are raised in a household where you see that, you either absorb that as an attribute of your characteristic, which adds to your persona, which makes you more qualified to be successful in your industry, or you think that's too much, it's too extenuating, overwhelming, and inundating. It's too much work. It's too much of a grind. I don't feel like hustling. And so people go away from that. So it's very interesting, as being that I'm in the position that I am, especially being that I am a mother of two Black children. I feel that I am responsible for exemplifying, what this means for me and what it could potentially mean to my children. And I have a responsibility to others I haven't even met yet to keep it going and stay afloat and make sure that any accolade or accomplishment that is achieved goes back out to the community. Because if we don't show people that it's possible, which means that we don't have the opportunity to view and emulate the behaviors and the defined successes of those that are a part of our Black business or Black community in general, then we believe it's not possible because the majority doesn't present or represent Black people the way that we know and feel that it is true and accurate to be, based on personal account.
That is rich, and I just want to pause and say we got a powerhouse panel, and I wish we had a lot more time. You touched on something that I know that Mr. Sapir can speak to. You know, what you see, you will be. He says this often. And, you know, I happen to know that his children, watching his example, at least the ones that I follow on Facebook, have gone on to emulate this entrepreneurial spirit. And so with that in mind, I want to toss it to you, Mr. Sapir, to talk about, again, you know, what are the challenges and opportunities in present day Long Beach for business? I know you have several businesses throughout the city, and then just touch on some of the things that some of the other panelists have talked about, and other folks feel free to chime in. You're on mute, brother.
I appreciate this. This is, you've dug a little bit deeper than my expectations were of the group, but I appreciate your honesty and your insights.
You got a low bar for us.
Beg your pardon?
You got a low bar for us, huh?
Well, you know, normally when we're in a forum that's all American, there's some inhibitors from the past that keep us from standing as tall as we are. And I appreciate how tall all of you have been today. I wanted to say right off the bat that when Keena spoke, you know, I had 2 franchises, and I did it through SBA. And of course, I learned early on that I needed to sit by old-fashioned fax machine and whiteout until I got my load, you know. But it made it possible for me to have a business over by the traffic circle, and one on Willow and MLK. Now, in those businesses, I don't necessarily, and I do this with my rentals also, I don't tell them I'm the owner. I tell them I work for some guy in Beverly Hills, and they respect him. But the green still flows. So I don't worry about that. My ego's not involved. You know, if we're talking about the present, I'd like to speak about the white fences that we had in Long Beach, redevelopment. I had suggested to the city that those white fences should be developed by African-American partnerships. And those partnerships allowed to develop those properties. As you see, a lot of them have went to the larger developers that are able to pay on the other side of the bridge, which forbids us from participating. One other thing in terms of the present is the public exposure of the master plan for the city. In the 1970s, it had to be snuck out of the city hall, but it needs to be more transparent so business people can buy and wait or develop accordingly.
Mm.
The key to our community is we have to be able to form partnerships with each other to develop downtown or in other areas. And as far as I'm concerned, I can partnership with anyone as long as it's written. We don't even have to agree, but as long as it's in writing, where I can sue you or take you to court, we can do something together, which is lacking either in education or understanding. And I want to talk to Keena later if she has the inroad to where we can invest and get compound interest. I'd be very interested in that. And the owner of a business, the business doesn't have life, but the owner has life. That's the organism of the business that makes it thrive. The owner that breathes into that business. Yeah, I'll stop right there. I can give lectures, so I'm gonna stop. If that's
Well,
what,
don't feel obliged to stop. I mean, if you're flowing, you flow. We have till about 10:30, but if it goes over, then that's okay too. Since we're talking about present business, and I have a little bit of insight, I won't steal too much of the thunder. I want to go to Pastor Cheney to talk about, as we moved into the facility there on Pine, on 4th and Pine, used to be the vault. Some of the blessings and some of the disappointments, frankly, that you experienced in trying to, come down, in coming down to downtown Long Beach, not just as a church, but obviously the venue is going to be business. But I wonder if you could speak to some of the challenges and opportunities in the present associated with that.
Absolutely. I think, Carl, excellent question. And I, again, just thank Craig for putting this together in this context, because it's really important. I think there are quite a few, not only in the downtown area, but folks who would like to get there who have these conversations in private, but there's no public forum for it. So I want to thank you again for that. We're grateful that the building went through. In many respects, we said that we want our next location to be representative of the kingdom and culture. We want to inspire the kingdom and culture to the point that both Keena and Brother Sapir made. There were some battles to overcome on many fronts. And one of the reasons that we intentionally left our negotiations and everything surrounding the deal silent is because we realized that once we made it known, again, even after there has been goodwill for 60 years or more, it would be a challenge. It would be a challenge for some. And again, the multi-generational reference was really it spoke to this idea of goodwill over, again, generations. And it was a specific reference to the people who felt as if they needed to grant permission for us to do what we need to do in a city that we've been in for a long time. one of the challenges was the mentality we spoke to earlier, the psychology, the assumptions, no matter what you accomplish, that in a general sense, you just cannot overcome. I think Jay-Z wrote a song about it in his 444 album entitled OJ. And, basically, what he was getting at is, you reach a certain platitude and the assumption is that, hey, I'm not going to deal with the things that, other African-American Blacks deal with. Well, what he was doing is demystifying that myth, because no matter what you accomplish, there are people that are going to see you again through the lenses or the hermeneutic of suspicion, the lenses of the media, because there has not been enough proximity for them to know that there are Kinas that are on the top of their game. There are Melissas, there are Theresas, there are Ahmeds who, again, will not only serve that community well, but they'll raise the bar in many respects. And so for us coming into this deal, we wanted to make sure that we raised the bar. We didn't just want another venue. We wanted to exceed expectation. We didn't want to just look like we belong down there. No, we wanted to be the premier venue. And we spent more money than we should have in order to raise the bar. We didn't come down there to try to get a seat at the table. We came to raise the bar. And one of the many challenges, and I think it's important for people who don't have proximity to understand what happens for those of us that want to continue to raise that bar. I sat in rooms that I paid for with my retainer, that people spoke around me as if I wasn't there.
That's right.
Talking to one another, and y'all sitting here on my retainer. I was, and I'm grateful for my friends at the Post. I'm grateful for the work that they do. I'm grateful for the editor who has just done phenomenal stories over the years, on us, and has continued to share about some of the things that we do, not looking for any fanfare. We're grateful for them and the folks that they have there. But there were some preemptive strikes before we even got a chance to come into the downtown area. We're intelligent, innuendos, subtle, slights to create suspicion, to make it difficult. I had people, again, business friends in the downtown area who've been there for a long time, some of whom have been there for generations. And when I got the candid response, after the niceties were over, backroom stuff, the things I heard as relates to just us being there, conversations about us not being able to afford the space. And I'm thinking to myself, who saw our list of donors, our books, and what we're working with? And I realized that no matter what you accomplish, there will always be, again, a suspicion that you have to work through. There will be assumptions made about what you will bring. And some of it's just change is different. We all are a little uneasy with change. But these are the things that we experience. When you talk about again the intersectionality that Kena talked about, or the double taxation that we face on a regular basis as folks just trying to do good business in areas that are not used to it. There is twice the effort, often for half the progress. And this is something that really must be addressed. I'm grateful again for this platform. I'm grateful for the candor of the individuals on this platform. As Brother Sapir said, a platform where we can stand tall. And again, if I take some hits for it, if I take some lumps for it, I'm okay with it. But I think I'm willing to do that to create pathways for those who will follow. And I'm okay with that. I'm really not looking for Long Beach to give me anything else. It's been a great run, if nothing else. I think now is the time for us to name these things, to create these pathways, and to really strategically intentionally think about how we're going to make this experience easier for those who follow us. So we're going to continue to the best of our ability to inspire. We're going to continue to function in excellence. And we're going to be to Melissa's, I'm going to steal her statement. I'll give her credit for it on the panel. I may say it's mine after a few panels, but it's okay to be unapologetically Black. The world is inspired by our innovation, our creativity, our influence, our style, and everyone else has in many respects owned it. Now it's time for us to own it unapologetically. And again, we are recrafting the narrative. We talk about from the past to the present. We've received the baton. Now it's time for us again to build the foundation laid, but it's also time to recraft the narrative. I often say it out in here. I realize we're out of time. We're running a long time, but people ask me often, what do you want to accomplish? What's one thing you want them to say? This city's known for so much. Some of the events I talked about earlier, our dear brother, Snoop. I want the city to be known. When people ask me from a faith standpoint, 50 years from now, I want people to think of Long Beach and have to think, number one, of what the people of God did there. That's the faithful part of my faith expression, and I'm unapologetic about that too. That's from our tradition. That's for the kingdom. But there's also a contribution for the culture. 50 years from now, I want people to have to take note of what Black people in Long Beach were able to accomplish. I don't want to just look back and celebrate those who laid the foundation for us. Thank God for what Dr. King did. My other grandfather marched with him and paved the way with the older ministers in the South for him to do what he did. I praise God for all of the other contributions that have been made historically. The building we're in, Paul Revere Williams, it's a Paul Revere Williams building. One of the most celebrated Black architects in history, one of the most celebrated architects in history, who had to learn how to draw upside down, to sketch upside down for his clients because he couldn't sit next to his white clients. That's excellent. The question is, what are we going to do in our time? What are we going to do in our generation to inspire? Because 50 years after I'm gone, I want people to have to know what the people of God did in the city when they say Long Beach, but also when they say Long Beach, what the Black people in Long Beach did. You shouldn't be able to say the name of the city without folks thinking about what we did to inspire. And based on what I've heard from these panelists, I think we are off to a good start.
Man, that's I think it's important that people hear that from you, and so that one, they realize they're not alone in the challenges, no matter, and you're at the pinnacle, and you still have to face racism in a room that you paid for with people that you're paying, still treating you in an inferior way. I think we've talked a lot about this candor, and we're on a clock. So, I think what people should know is that, Long Beach's Black community is strong and beautiful and diverse. On this panel, we have, a rich diversity. And so these conversations have been ongoing and will continue. But really the power of this candor should not be anything other than change. what should be coming from this candor by the folks who are listening, the folks who are in positions to do something about it, who are not Black, and who are Black, is promoting change. When you're in the room, speak about the issues that make a difference, no matter what you look like. Because as one of America's treasures, Dave Chappelle said, as Black America goes, so goes America. And so we have to take care of the issues amongst the least of us. Noting the time, I want to do a couple of things. One, I won't be calling on panelists. Panelists jump in. Two, Melissa, I know that you have some notes and lots of thoughts. So before I make this last point, I want to go to you. And then three, I want to go to some of the questions that we have in the chat so we can get some of those in. We can go beyond 10:30 so we can make sure that we get the Q&A involved. But that's going to be the order as we bring this in for a landing. With that, I'd like to go to Melissa. Melissa, share some of those gems with us.
Yeah, thanks, Carl. I put in the chat, I got 2 more pages of notes, Pastor. Come on, let me get in here. Thanks, guys. Important conversation. I've been chatting with some folks online, and it's amazing, our differing perspectives and experiences. Kina, I really appreciate you talking about your intersectionality, and I'm looking forward to us having some more conversations about that. We should get online and do that some more. Absolutely. So I'm a communications person, so I've been thinking about like some ways to capture some of these messages, things that I really believe and feel and have heard and seen. So in kind of my closing piece and thinking about the present and the future, I've got 4 R letter words: reining in, revitalizing, rebuilding, and responsibility. So for me, reining in is about, I'm seeing some chat in our Q&A here, you know, how should chambers of commerce, how should the DLBA, and how should others really look at how we can support equity in our communities? So one would be rein in this gentrification impulse. So pause it for a moment, reconsider, reevaluate. So reconsider, what's your motive? Inclusion's about who's being involved, whose voices are you hearing? So reevaluate that. Who's at the table? Who's sharing and shaping the plan for gentrification, for upgrading a community in whatever area it is? And what are the other resources that could be shared in neighboring communities? You know, I talked about living in North Long Beach. I freaking love North Long Beach, and what I have discovered about the people here, the pride, the history, the heritage, love it. And I want to be able to have the choice to live downtown again if I'd like to, especially when my kids go to college. So I'm going to have beachside residency, hopefully one day. The reining in piece too around gentrification, the DLBA commissioned a whole counter report against what the city had created. I think the city used a KMA to create a report around how affordable housing would burden or constrain developers. And then the DLBA, you all commissioned a whole other study and put resources and time and effort into a study by Beacon that basically said that it sounded like what the city had proposed was way too expensive, we can't do it. But yet the community, folks like Libre and others, the people power stood up and said, actually, yeah, we can do these things. And inclusionary housing is really important for our community so that we don't erase the face and that fabric, that history of who this city is. So really, if you look at inclusionary housing, if you fight against it, then you're using an anti-Black lens, because in the end, it ultimately is going to favor folks who are in power, folks who have privilege. It's going to favor race and class issues for those who are more advantaged. Around revitalize, again, engaging all local community members and stakeholders. Stakeholders are not just, as I was reading the report of downtown, stakeholders were involved. Were the houseless involved? Doubt it. What about the folks with low income multifamily dwellings? Were they engaged? Don't know. But to revitalize, you have to engage all community members. That's the amazing thing about diversity. Diversity isn't just having a lot of different types of people. To see diversity in its most rich form is to using this verb of inclusion, actively engaging all perspectives. We know there's a strong business case for diversity. It makes your work richer by getting many perspectives and ideas and including people in the process. So to revitalize, you've got to build relationships. You've got to make space for community-led planning. I know that in our culture of professionalism, having worked with the city and in partnership with corporations, there's a culture of professionalism that is absolutely based on white supremacy. So I'm going to ask you to rethink that and think about what can you do differently to build relationships with the people who have the least, because those are the people who are going to be impacted in a very negative way around decisions in changing the face of the city. Then I want to say rebuild. So we've got Cambodia Town. We've got these different thoroughfares, these different corridors. I heard mention, I think, Ahmed, you talked about just how, areas of our city have changed. They used to have a Black presence. And we know that through politics and through other decisions of elected leaders, communities have changed. Cambodia Town thrives as a movement where the community is engaging in what this corridor is going to look like in their neighborhood. It's no longer Black, that's changed, but the Cambodian community has really grabbed on and they've utilized the strength and power of their voice to be able to amplify the things that they think are important in their community. I would ask DLBA to consider supporting something like this, supporting these other movements that are happening around the country, around our area, our community, where there are corridors that are being changed by the people. So rebuilding, how will you engage residents? How will you engage residents in concrete ways and then integrate their feedback into your decision-making process? It's going to be a rich experience. It's going to be uncomfortable. There's going to be conflict, but in the end, I think you're going to feel incredibly proud with the result. And then the responsibility piece. Pastor Cheney, I think all the time about the saying of, am I my brother's keeper? I was raised in the South, and I was raised in a family with a lot of great Black teachings as part of our culture. I'm also a multiracial person, but that idea of, are we our brother's keeper, I think is really key to think about in a community like ours that is incredible, that has so much diversity, so much class difference. We've got this huge spectrum. I feel a sense of responsibility, and I know so many people in Long Beach do, for our neighbors. So Craig, when you talked about the day after the uprisings, that was Long Beach, people came together. Those people have always been here. Some of them might have been involved in the protests because they also, if you're tapped into knowing real people's experiences with discrimination and oppression and police brutality and on and on and on, then you know that we care about each other, we care about our well-being, and we care about our neighbor. I think our Long Beach is a diverse Long Beach, and it goes across the spectrum of income and race. Lastly, I would say for DLBA members, recruitment. Look at your recruitment, your hiring, your retention, your promotion of Black workers. Look at partnering with the university and build some pathways for our college students here to get engaged in your businesses. Seek out diverse businesses as you're building up your plans of what businesses you want to have come into your areas. Mentor sole proprietors like me who are Black, who we've just always had this hustle and we've done it for free, or maybe sometimes we made a little money. Help us get the licensing that we need that, my goodness, $1,000, even a couple $100 for a website is expensive to those of us who are really trying to work uphill to make a better community for the people that we love and care about in our neighborhoods and across our county. And then lastly, I'd say I'm really excited, Craig, to hear that you all want to create a diversity and access plan and policy. And I'd say really involve folks who are involved in that work around diversity and inclusion, get those diverse perspectives, and take the time. I think this is where we are with the racial reconciliation process and everything else. Take the time to look in the mirror and really acknowledge, where have we played a part in increasing the divide and the gap between people in our community? If we can be brave enough to really face that and say it out loud, looking at one last thing I'll point out is just in my what I've learned this past year from the women in Long Beach who led the Black Lives Matter movement here. It's phenomenal how much Black people suffer at the hands of police. There's an article from August of Black bicyclists. We are pulled over more often than any other person on a bicycle, and then can be physically harassed, abused by police, large use of force against Black people on bikes. Like, we are a bike-friendly city, but it's not friendly for Black folks. So it's that kind of discomfort and conversation that risks money, and it risks the showy, beautiful, luxury kind of place we want to create, but it's worth it. And we have to make that commitment to face the ugly and start to speak up and speak out against it. Thank you, guys.
Great stuff, Melissa. And it is all connected. So as we talk about police brutality, that's a conversation about business. One thing I noticed, if you look around, you'll see things, and maybe you didn't know you should pay attention. But for the folks out there in TV land, maybe my panelists and certainly my non-Black viewers, observe how the difference in pedestrians. Watch how Black people cross the street and walk around cars versus how other folks might walk around cars. There's a level of gun shyness. I don't want to use that pun accidentally. That this constant soup of racial oppression that Black people walk in every single day affects our get down on every level. That we have to constantly we're like bumblebees, like we're flying, but we're not supposed to be able to fly like we do against the odds that are constantly on us. But if we pay attention to those things, I think, we'll be able to change them. There are several questions in the chat. We're coming to a close. I'm gonna toss this to you first, Theresa, just a heads up. As we have this conversation about what to do, what are the things that can be done? So on this panel, from an institutional perspective, there's you and there's Craig, who are in positions to do some things. And so I want to lead with you, and then maybe have everybody included. But again, the targets are the institute. What can institutions do to begin to make some changes to correct some of these inequities that Black businesses have faced in Long Beach historically?
Sure, thank you. Well, I think Melissa spoke beautifully to many things that we can already do, including voices at the table and being transparent in the work that we do. But I do want to speak a little bit to just some of the shifts that has been happening within the city structure, because it is connecting to all the structures and systems across the city. And I think that, when we're looking at the obstacles, Kina, you spoke so eloquently about your experience of the barriers as a business owner, the costly membership fees and the lack of information and, just all those resources that people need in order to thrive. And so in the most recent years, let's see, in 2017, the city created the Office of Equity that started in the Department of Health and Human Services. It was charged with focusing attention on equity and social justice, coordinating programs and building capacity across the city government to focus on racial and health equity. This office has most recently been relocated under me in the city manager's office to elevate the work not only across the city structure, but also to connect to systems throughout the city. So it probably in another panel, I can dive deeper into the reconciliation process and the work of the Office of Equity. But there's a lot that people can do to get involved. And so I would like to give out my information so that people can get connected in that way. Also in 2017, the city adopted a blueprint for economic development, which is a 10-year agenda for enhancing opportunity for the city's workers and entrepreneurs. As a result of advocacy from community organizations and residents, one of the key focus areas is on economic inclusion, which focuses on increasing access to opportunities in low-income communities to advance that economic equity. The blueprint was followed by the Everyone In initiative, which was launched by Vice Mayor Rex Richardson, in partnership with the Los Angeles Local Initiative Support Corporation. Its goal is to promote economic inclusion and dismantle barriers that have caused racial and gender wealth gaps. The plan focuses the policy recommendations on small businesses and diverse entrepreneurships, local inclusive procurement process, workforce and youth development, economic resiliency and housing and homeownership. And then in 2017, also under the direction of the city manager's office, asked the Office of Equity to identify a partner to connect an economic equity study for the city of Long Beach. So all of this is this acknowledgement piece, looking at the data as I spoke to before, and how we really dive deep into acknowledging where we have been and creating pathways to move forward. And then June 2020, after George Floyd was murdered, the council immediately approved a formal resolution stating racism as a public health crisis. This is the first time The city of Long Beach has done that. And that's when we adopted the framework for reconciliation. And so this plan is deliberately and intentionally acting to end systemic racism in Long Beach, and really, again, calling out and acknowledging where we have been, and figuring out how we move forward as a collective. We cannot do this alone. We have to do it with our community stakeholders and partners. And so there's a lot of work that people can dive into. Again, I'd like to connect with each of you who are out there who are interested in how you can really dive into this process with us. So additionally, the city specifically focuses on Black-owned businesses through our development block grants. And we have an economic development team who's diving into a lot of programs to identify what Kina was speaking to on how to get resources and connect people to be successful in their own right. And we have a long way to go. This is certainly not the be all end all, but I can speak from this perspective of where I'm sitting. And in the 9 months that I've been sitting here, the 8 months in the city manager's office focusing on reconciliation, we have made some moves in spaces that I don't think the city has done before. And I can say I'm proud of that. I can also say we have a long ways to go, but we are having conversations. I couldn't say racial equity and racism and white supremacy, quite honestly, sitting here in the city manager's office a few months ago. And I have those conversations regularly. And so there are many things that we can do as a community. We're going to have a community advisory. We're going to have a lot of things going hand in hand on how we can move this work forward together. And we also, connecting with our school systems and the business community and the faith-based community, all of us coming together collectively in partnership is the only way that we're going to be able to do it. And I think that Long Beach can be a model for that across the country. So I'll stop there. I also have many pages, Melissa.
Well, listen, don't, keep flowing. If you have more, I don't want to cut you off. Don't take my unmuting my microphone as a prompt.
No.
Do you have more?
No, I'm good. Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, I mean, I keep saying it's a powerhouse panel, but it really is. Like, the women and men on this panel are just amazing. And so, like, I wish we had more time. I do want to follow up on what you've said. And, I think I've been, as a moderator, derelict in doing this. And so I apologize. It should have been done at the beginning. But I want to pay homage to, some folks who helped pave the way and are currently paving the way. For me, that's Doris Topsy-Elvort, one of our, legends here in the city, both as a city council person, the first Black vice mayor, harbor commissioner, former councilman Steve Neal, who's now on the Harbor Commission, Vice Mayor Rex Richardson, and his leadership and the reconciliation work, Councilman Al Austin, and his leadership, among many other things, in the creation and formation of the African American Cultural Center, Councilman D. Andrews for his long community service in the 6th District. I mean, it's just important that we acknowledge them, and I should have done that at the outset. So I apologize to them for not doing that. I want to, again, open it up to other panelists, and feel free to include yourself in the conversation, not just as an observer here, Craig, about what can and should be done tangibly to, and Craig and I talked about this, not benefit people of color and businesses of color. I love everybody under the rainbow, but I'm Black. So I want to talk specifically about what can be done to advantage and restore some of the inequities that Black businesses in Long Beach have faced, and what kind of programs, incentives, recruitment tools can we do? What can we do?
Yeah, thanks, Carl, for offering that. But I want to defer to Mr. Sapir, who's had his hand up, and I know he's got something to say. So, in the interest of time, can I just defer this to Mr. Sapir?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't see the hand. Sorry.
Yeah, and I'll come back and answer your question.
I have a small hand. One thing the DLBA I've always thought could get involved in is encouraging the city or get grants to provide some low interest loans. Now, loans enough themselves are not enough. We need some incubator programs downtown. I know that the business development center, I noticed it's gone. And it was there, I don't know, a year and a half. Either that, it's moved in a building, but it's moved off of where the medical marijuana place is. It was right next door to that, but I see it's gone now. So I don't know where it's relocated, but that's a very valuable tool that the Downtown Business Association can have. The other item is there's certain tools that you have to be involved in business. And I think all of us understand that as African Americans, we have to grow the future. Other people know this, but we have to understand that we have to grow tomorrow. And all I want from other folks is don't stand in our way. When I try to do progress, don't stand in the way, and I'll come up with the ways and means. That sometimes is an inhibiting characteristic that exists, which everyone has mentioned today. The marketing of small business loans is a very important factor for folks to go in business, and more business seminars. That's something that came out of the developments, but they would have them way out at the Lakewood campus. They weren't available for folks in the area. And so I think that's very important. I'm dealing with the future now. Some of the things can be done. I don't know what happened to the budget with some of the funds that have been lost to the Long Beach PD, but maybe some of those can be diverted to the Downtown Business Association. And my last comment is, the IRS allows nonprofits to have businesses. It doesn't allow businesses to have a nonprofit. But to me, that's a big door opener for places of religion, organizational development, if the IRS allows it. And that would employ people, that would force people to begin to work together, and it would generate capital for whatever organization you have. And with the Downtown Business Association, we could work with them on some of the vacancies. I mean, the pandemic, all businesses are not going to make it, not going to survive. So that's going to create some brick and mortars that are available for risk takers, entrepreneurs.
Yeah, thank you for that, Mr. Sapir. I also want to, before I come to you, Pastor Cheney, I failed to mention former Councilwoman and Congresswoman Laura Richardson. It's been so long since I've seen her, so I apologize for forgetting her. She made such a huge impact, so I wanted to acknowledge her as well. Pastor Cheney, please.
Yeah, this is great. I know we're running, but just to get around some of that insider-outsider dynamic. I mean, as we talked about before, I love my city. Wouldn't be anywhere else. But the insider-outsider dynamic is something that's just felt, and great job's been done with groups like Leadership Long Beach. So when people come into the city, we fast track some of that, or to change that. The dynamics change without them having to be there for 20 years before, or to have relational equity before they're able to get some of these things done. But I feel like there is that effort in many respects, and Craig's done this in many respects organically downtown, but maybe intentionally, this idea of recruiting, but then aligning, covering, advocating for some of these quality businesses as they're taking time to build up credibility in Long Beach. I think that'd be extremely important. When my grandfather was in a denomination that was predominantly about 95% white. There were a few African-American leaders that helped diversify that denomination. One of the things, Tom Kelly, a gentleman, he called it the theology of presence. And what he suggested is, while there's so many strategic things we can do that are necessary, a good start is just representation, presence, because the presence on the boards, again, in the staffing, allows for proximity. Proximity allows for empathy, engagement, equity. So with that said, that's a big one. I know we in many respects are evolving, but that's something that's a pillar. Representation changes everything. And I think it's important to note that not just Black representation on a board, but to, I believe it was Melissa's point, there's diversity. We're not a monolith in the Black experience in America. So some consideration given not just to individuals on boards who are Black, but are these folks that have credibility in pockets of the broader Black community. Some diversity even with the Black representation on these boards, I think, is significant. Then finally, I'm with Brother Sapir in this, we want to activate, we do our part in activating North Pine. As you know, the model is not just a church, it is a venue that we use as a church. So again, our goal is to have quality events, thousands of people coming through there in a week. What we would love to see are more restaurants and businesses that some of those people coming through the venue can frequent. And so I would like to think through, and I'm sure we don't have time for it now, what that sort of partnership looks like as it relates to, again, those vacancies. What can we do to get folks in there to give them a start? Our part will be to ensure that folks are funneled to those businesses to give them every opportunity they need to become successful.
Thank you. Craig, did you want to share some of your thoughts? But as we come to you, I just want to point out that, Craig said, "Hey, Carl, this is what I want to do. I don't want it to be the same old same." And sort of like you said, Mr. Sapir, then he got out of the way, and talk to us about really what this pivot, because I've known you a long time, but this is a clear pivot for DLBA, not for you personally per se, but it's a clear pivot for DLBA. Talk to us about the pivot, what's on the horizon in terms of tangible assets that can benefit Black businesses, and a little bit more on that.
Yeah, it was a pivot, and I raised a lot of eyebrows by making a conscious and public pivot post May 31st. I reached out to Pastor Cheney. I reached out to Kina. I spoke with Carl. In fact, Carl called me out and said that I missed it based on a statement that we put out following George Floyd's murder. But I understood his point, and I recognized and respect his point. And being a 64-year-old white male, I understand that I have a lot to learn, and I'm going to learn by shutting up and listening. And I felt as though we have to do that collectively. My background is I grew up in Detroit. I grew up in the city of Detroit. My father owned a small business. I remember the 67 riots. I'm old enough to remember our 67 riots. I'll never forget what happened to our city that night. And reminiscing of what happened May 31st in my new city, Long Beach, I have been here over 30 years, it brought back a lot of painful memories. And I knew that we just cannot sit as an organization and as a leader within the organization and within the community. I just couldn't sit back and watch it happen. mean, there's questions and there's certainly things that we can do. And I think the city has done a lot since May, since June, on just its framework for reconciliation and recognizing what it needed to hear and think about how it's going to manage its future in bringing in the Black community and people of color. And we're no different. I look around and I look at my board and my committee members, and I ask myself, is this a proper representation of our downtown community? We have 1,700 businesses in our downtown. We know of 30 Black-owned businesses. And because the city doesn't ask if they're Black-owned or not, we get the information from the city, so we know as much as the city does when it comes to that data. And Melissa, you talked about data. Theresa, you talked about data. Once we get greater data, I'm sure that we'll know and learn more about more Black-owned businesses in our downtown, knowing that we're going to help promote them. The pivot was very conscious, and it's being very strategic. It's not going to stop with this conversation. It can't stop with this conversation. Social change is always ongoing. Social change is not a light switch that something happens and you flip on that light switch, and all of a sudden, all things that from its past have changed, and all things with its future will also evolve. This is an ongoing conversation, and these are difficult conversations that we're having, and they're long overdue. We are working with a host of consultants, and we are providing these services ranging from access to capital to business management to legal to marketing. And we're offering these free services to entrepreneurs and incubator and startup businesses and retaining businesses as we move along. So these are services that we're also offering our stakeholders and stakeholders that are thinking about becoming downtown businesses. And again, our focus is strictly on the downtown for good reason. The assessment dollars that come from the property owners, the residents, as well as the business owners are being reinvested back into the downtown. And then that's for good reason. Our outreach and our strategic plan will include diversity and access to the organization. And we have to learn more about that as we kind of learn more about ourselves in developing the strategic plan. So it doesn't, again, stop there. So these are the tangible things that we're looking at from an economic development standpoint, from an equity standpoint, and from a leadership perspective. And I think this is the first of many conversations we will have publicly, and I'll have many more privately to be able to better understand what we could do and how we could go about doing it more effectively, more efficiently, and certainly more transparently. And Mr. Sapir, I want to thank you for suggesting that some funds could be utilized with the DLBA. I'll leave it to our partners at the city to determine that. That's not for me to say, but certainly that's an option that we could use. The city has been very, very helpful in moving our downtown agenda along, and certainly I think we have a lot to learn with that relationship as well.
So I want to open it up as we come to a close here. I think I want to thank everyone who's watched. I want to thank Melissa. Melissa has answered a lot of the questions that we had in our chat. So I want to thank her and lift her up for doing that. I think as we come to a close, I want to say thank you first to all of the panelists. You've given your time, you've given your insight, you've given your heart to this conversation. Certainly, there's a lot to say and not a lot of time, but each one of you brings so much to this conversation, and I'm personally grateful that you answered the call, and collectively grateful that you offered it to the city and the viewers. I want to say thank you to Craig and to the DLBA team, to Sam and Austin and Brock and your whole team for putting this together in a way that promoted it with quality and facilitated it with quality through Zoom. And I'm just grateful to be alive in a time where we can have this kind of conversation with folks I know and have lived, done life with, as Wayne says. To have been asked to be a part of this and to have been able to participate is a real honor and a treat, and I thank you for it. I also want to say that if you are interested in more of the Black businesses throughout the city of Long Beach, one, check out the DLBA website. They have a map for the downtown Long Beach Black businesses, but they also have a link to, again, the broader Black-owned Long Beach. It's a site that Shireen Senegal and her team are putting together. It's really excellent. And I just love the bridge that you built there, Craig. So everyone should check that out if you want to find ways to practice what we call Ujima, Ujama, cooperative economics. Please do that. And with that, I'll just ask each panelist to maybe give us a 1 minute closing thought, starting with our elder, Mr. Sapir. Give us a 1 minute closing thought about how we move forward from here, if you would.
I think this is a great addition to the movement of progress. I would think that the Downtown Business Association would do this also in October as a follow-up. We don't have to work just in February. We could do it twice a year. It would be all right. The other point is Ms. Fuller, one of your paid consultants to the Downtown Business Association. Am I on mute? Hello?
You are not muted, Mr. Sapir. What is your question?
All right. My question was the Downtown Business Association, is Mrs. Fuller one of their paid consultants?
I am working with the DLBA.
Okay, all right. Then we are making progress in the right direction. See, that's why I
Absolutely.
asked that, and is all this, I would want to ask, is all the board of DLBA on this call, on this panel? Are they participating?
Is anyone on the board participating on this panel?
Yeah, are your board members on board?
Well,
are they watching?
Oh, yeah. There was a number of them that were on earlier. I don't know if they're still on.
Okay, because like I asked the Chief Luna yesterday, what's the cooperation in changing culture? How involved is the union? And boy, that's another thing. So that's why I asked about who's watching, because we have to deal in terms of changing the culture of the mentalities that support systemic, unconsciously racism.
Thank you, Mr. Sapir. Let's see. Who'd like to go? Let me go to Theresa Chandler next.
I am just grateful to be a part of this panel and these discussions. I feel like often there's a lot of conversations that happen that are really exciting and really rich, and then they stay in that moment of time. But I feel like we're in an opportunity right now in a time where we can't afford that. And what I've seen so far is that people are taking action and moving quickly. There's so many lessons learned, even in these past 9 months. For me, I'm learning daily on how to do this work and how to move it forward. And I make mistakes regularly. And there's many opportunities to grow. But I'm grateful for that. And so staying in the moment, it's easy to dwell on the past, and we also have to acknowledge the past. But being in the moment where we are makes it easier to be hopeful for moving forward. And so again, I'm grateful for the conversations, but I'm more excited about what's to come from the conversations, the relationships we're building, the partnerships right now, and all of this fabric that we're weaving into. The city of Long Beach has already had a rich fabric, but we're embedding even more content and good things into the environment so that we can really move the work forward. So I just want to thank you all for that. And I look forward to more work to come together.
Thank you so much, Madam Manager. With that, I'll go to Melissa.
Thanks. I was thinking about, I met Ahmed maybe like 15 or so years ago when we were working on the city's youth and gang violence prevention task force. And that's then how I heard and met Pastor Cheney. And it's just a reminder to me that we have the answers. There are people in our community of any background. We've been working together for a lifetime, it feels like. And we know it works. There are amazing studies. We've got the data. We've got creative ideas. I think now it's just time to really let's do something different. And so I just wanted to cite, I love this report. It's the policy link from USC report, the Equitable Growth Profile, which Councilmember Richardson has reminded me about over and over again. It's really wonderful, this report, because it's very clear, the stuff we've been talking about for years. And so just one of the mentions on like page 3 where it says, equity, it's just and fair inclusion. And that's not just hashtag equity, it's just. We're talking about justice. We're not talking about peace and harmony. We're talking about real justice. And sometimes that looks ugly getting there. Equity is a moral imperative, and it's the path to prosperous and inclusive new economy. And cities like Long Beach, we have a critical role to play in leading the way forward. That's why I love Long Beach. I've said it since I moved here. I moved here to work with high school kids to talk about and work through issues of race and racism. Our high school students are brilliant and they have the answers to this stuff because they're living it every day. We are a symbol of the United States of America, and I still believe people can learn from us. Cities like ours, we have the economic power, we have the diversity, we have the innovation. We have the innovation required to forge new models, new, not old, new models of equitable growth. So I think that needs to be a core operating principle in the work that we do in Long Beach, looking at equity, looking at new models, and really facing the challenge to make hard decisions to do what's right for all of us, not just some of us.
Thank you, Melissa. And thank you for being on the panel. Kina, if you would, Ms. Fuller.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you all. This conversation has been fantastic, and it definitely feels like a beginning, which is extremely important. We talk about the past, the present, and the future. I firmly believe that the past, in a lot of ways, can remain a part of our present if we don't move forward. There's always facts to support the facts that you want to be supported, meaning when you ask bigger questions, you can always pull out bits of the information that are good and in alignment with your perspective. And in a lot of ways, people can shape their perspective or perception in thinking that there is no wrongdoing and there isn't anything going on, or there isn't inequity. But that is not true. We know that isn't true. So we have to do more. Nothing changes if nothing changes. And so it is a big part of our individual responsibility to do well with this information and resource and take it back into the community and continue to stand tall and do our part in any and every single way that we know to be possible. This isn't a flavor of the month. This isn't a Black History Month thing. This is a conversation that is here and now and must continue on going forward. But in order to be able to do that, going back to relational equity, we have to do it together. So there's always strength in numbers. And if we stand tall and shoulder to shoulder and move forward in this direction, we will see change, and change that is sustained and becomes an influential pillar within our community. Thank you very much for having me as part of the panel. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Kina. I think, like so many others who are meeting you for the first time, it is delightful now to have you at the cookout. The cookout is better for having you here. We've been at the cookout with each other for a minute, but it's great to have you here.
Thank you.
Pastor Cheney.
Man, it's been a pleasure to be with everyone. Just what an amazing, amazing panel. It's an honor to be counted in that number. To the hostess with the mostest, listen, Carl, you did an amazing job as always, man. We celebrate you.
Well, I got to be a hostess.
Okay, I mean host with the most. Yeah. Listen, man, we appreciate you, man. Thanks for what you do. Craig, listen, there are more with you than against you. I just encourage you and implore you to keep pushing in this direction. History, long term, will be on your side. And so we're grateful for your visionary leadership and your boldness in taking this step. I pray that you continue to push, and more with you than there are against you. Listen, I've had, I think, 3 closing statements, so I'll just end with this. I think about our sister Aviva Zornberg in her commentary on the children of Israel as they're in the wilderness and the difficulty of the wilderness. I mean, when it's hot, it looks as if all hope's lost. They have on one hand this prophetic promise of this promised land that's ahead of them. On the other hand, they have what's behind them, which is the bondage of Egypt. And they actually cry out to go back to Egypt because the journey to the promised land is too difficult. And she says these words. She says, long before there was the death of their body in the wilderness, there was first the death of their imagination. And, my hope for us is that we employ that imaginative leadership. This journey is going to be difficult. I think all of us have felt the heat of it. And I hope folks stay tuned long enough to understand there are no chips on our shoulder, but this is just the weathering that comes with being in the wilderness for a while, feeling that heat. My prayer is that we employ that imaginative leadership. We keep the possibilities before us, because I do think there are great days ahead. Our strategic alignment, in many respects, will get us there. But my prayer is that we don't die in the wilderness because we've lost hope of the divine possibilities. And so, that's my remark. That's my prayer, and that's my hope. So grateful once again to be with you all.
Amen, Pastor Wayne.
Yes, Lord. And before I give it to you to close it up, Craig, again, thank you. I want to acknowledge that, a lot of the changes that we've seen since the murder of George Floyd, was a buildup, and was led by the elected officials that we've named. Some that we didn't name, Mayor Garcia, I asked if he would change the city's official policy to capitalize Black. Now that's just something that was important to me. But there are so many other things that folks who are not Black chose to step up and do from a leadership position to make not enough change to make up for the cavity that has been left by hundreds of years of racism, but more change than we've seen in a very long time that have given us some good momentum. Tom Modica, from a city manager, from a staff perspective, but there are folks on our side that aren't being lauded and acknowledged, and those are a couple of them. But it's also important to know that there are folks on the inside, like Theresa, who I haven't been a deputy city manager, but I've been close to the nucleus of the decisions that are made, and those are uncomfortable rooms to be in. And her knowing that there is a community of folks like us out here who are capable and caring enough to have her back is essential. And having someone like her in there with the depth of knowledge that she has is essential. So that symbiotic relationship is key, and I just wanted to say that out loud. Second, I also want to acknowledge the Long Beach Post. Long Beach Post, David Summers, I asked him to capitalize Black as a matter of policy. This was before AP did it, before New York Times Style Guy did it. they did it, and they're streaming this live as well. I forgot that it's streaming live on Facebook, but they're doing that as well. So I wanted to acknowledge them as part of this program and promoting it. Last thought. I've gotten a couple of texts during this exchange about, and we talked some about the candor. I just want to encourage all of us to continue to be courageous and fearless and candid about the situation, not necessarily always delicately, diplomatically tiptoeing around on rice paper, expecting that is going to make a difference and create radical change. Being at the table is one thing, but you have to bring tools, and sometimes those tools require us to be fearless, courageous, and candid. And I think this conversation will lead to a lot of great change. I want to thank you for it, and then give it to you to close. Thank you very much, Craig.
Thank you, Carl. Great job. I want to thank all the panelists for not only your participation, but your contribution to this discussion. Without you, this could not be as valuable and beneficial as it has been. And I feel as though it's a start of a longer conversation that needs to continue. And I look forward to your continued contributions to this. And certainly I want to thank staff again for their participation and all those that helped. And I'm glad, Carl, you mentioned David and the Long Beach Post and bringing this to a larger community. And certainly we want to continue having these conversations. So again, thank you very much for, again, your contributions. And Carl, great job in facilitating. Y'all have a great day, and I look forward to talking with you soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Happy Black History Month.
Thank you.
Thank you.